Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really powerful metaphor for any community facing challenges, the sailboat church, and this idea of how you prepare for the storms that you know are going to come.
So let's dive right in. The whole concept kicks off with this amazing metaphor, right? It reframes a church not as some static, unmoving building, but as a vessel on a real adventure. And hey, on any adventure worth its salt, you are going to hit some rough seas. The big idea here isn't to be shocked when a storm hits, but to expect it and be ready for it.
And that right there is a huge shift in thinking. The source is crystal clear on this. Facing conflict, hitting problems, that's not a sign you've failed. It's actually a natural, expected part of the whole journey. So the goal isn't to find some magic spell to avoid storms altogether. The real goal is to build a ship and train a crew so well that you can navigate those storms and come out the other side stronger and a whole lot wiser.
Okay, so how do we actually prepare our vessel? The source material lays out 4 key areas. And the first one, the absolute foundation of it all, is about strengthening the very engine and compass of the ship, its prayer life. Now, what's so fascinating here is the distinction the book makes. Prayer isn't treated like some kind of spiritual magic, where if you say the right words, you get what you want. No, instead, it's framed entirely as a relationship. It's about learning to trust a God who actually loves you and wants to give you what you need for the voyage ahead. It's not a transaction. It's about building this deep, deep trust.
And look, this isn't just some vague, nice-sounding idea. The author gives a super practical 4-step process for building this prayer culture long before a storm ever shows up on the horizon. It's about creating dedicated times for prayer, teaching people to actually look for and talk about answered prayers, sharing stories to build up faith, and getting small groups together just to pray. It's about weaving prayer into the very fabric of the community.
So, with that spiritual foundation firmly in place, what's next? Well, you have to make sure you have a skilled, unified, and totally prepared crew at the helm. This is all about developing rock-solid leadership. The source asks this really critical question, and honestly, the answer might surprise you. It makes the case that this often overlooked group, the nominating committee, might just have the single biggest long-term impact on the health of the entire church. And this slide just nails why that is. The common mistake is just seeing it as a job to fill empty slots. Who can we get to say yes? But the real spiritual mission is so much deeper. It's about taking the time to figure out what the church actually needs, and then prayerfully looking for the members who have the specific spiritual gifts to meet those needs. It's a total shift from just filling positions to discerning a calling.
And once you find those leaders, you can't just throw them in the deep end. They have to be equipped. The book lays out this really thorough training plan that covers everything from their own personal faith to the nuts and bolts of how the organization actually works. This isn't just about making them competent. It's about building trust and a powerful team dynamic that's going to be absolutely essential when a crisis finally hits.
All right, let's move to our third area. A spiritually grounded ship with a well-equipped crew still needs to practice. You need to know what to do when the waves start crashing over the deck. This means preparing for conflict by running storm drills.
So, the author gives us 4 proactive drills that any community can practice to lower the anxiety and navigate disagreements in a healthy way. First, you agree on the rules for handling conflict before it happens. Second, you learn to catch it early, back when it's just a small difference of opinion, before it festers. Third, you build trust by keeping communication wide open. And finally, you model core values like honesty and forgiveness in everything you do.
And here's the crucial part. These aren't just good management techniques you'd find in a business textbook. They're deeply rooted in a biblical call for a community that can actually handle real disagreement without falling apart. It's about being tender-hearted and forgiving, especially when it's the hardest thing to do.
And finally, the source brings it all together by focusing on the people. Because at the end of the day, the effectiveness of your ship depends entirely on the well-being of every single person on board. You have to cultivate emotional health.
So, one of the biggest dangers to any crew's health is this dynamic called triangulating. And you've seen this before. It's what happens when 2 people have a problem with each other, but instead of dealing with it head-on, they pull in a third person to vent to. Sure, it relieves a little tension for a moment, but the real problem never, ever gets solved. Here is a perfect classic example right from the text. A pastor feels underpaid, but instead of talking to the finance committee, he complains to the secretary. He gets to vent and feel a little better, but it creates this toxic us versus them vibe, it damages relationships, and it means a real solution is never even on the table.
Now, what's so great about this slide is it shows us the healthy alternative.
Maria sees that Mrs. Sinclair is hurt by something the new pastor did. Instead of jumping in and joining the criticism, which would be a triangling, she actively works to connect the two of them. She becomes a peacemaker, helping them resolve the issue directly. That's the goal.
Okay, another major threat to the crew's health is something called overfunctioning. This is when a few people, usually driven by anxiety, take on way more than their share because they feel like if I don't do it, nobody will, or it won't get done right.
And while this might look helpful on the surface, wow, look how dedicated they are, the author shows just how damaging this is. The person doing it feels burdened and starts to get resentful. It actually stops other people from stepping up and using their own gifts. And in the end, it just leads to burnout and sucks all the joy out of service.
And all of this brings us to the final, really powerful idea. The whole point of this preparation, the prayer, the leadership, the conflict drills, the emotional health, it's not just about surviving the next storm. It's about being so well prepared that you can actually harness the storm's power to become stronger, wiser, and better at your mission. So the final question isn't if a storm will come, it's how will you use it to grow?